Finally, we get a new retro survival horror game, and it takes place in a closed down theme park. Guys, just from the setting alone and the synopsis about this game, I was already through the roof and extremely excited about this game. But now that I've played through the entire game, I gotta ask myself, was it worth it? Does it suck? Is it truly a great love letter to classic survival horror, or is it just a pale imitation that isn't worth your time? Well, on today's episode of Nerd Space Games, I'm going to answer all of those questions and more on today's review of Crow Country. Crow Country? Crow Country. Damn, why the fuck is that so hard for me to say? Play the damn reel. Crow Country is a retro survival horror game that is inspired by games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, but with its own unique twist on the animation style. From the very start of the game, you can see SFB Games' own personal flair with the survival horror genre and its unique level design, set pieces, and animation style. In fact, I'm sort of reminded of Final Fantasy VII on the original PlayStation in terms of the characters' avatars of the game. I'll admit, I wasn't the biggest fan of the animation style, but I appreciate the developers trying to deliver a unique take on the retro look of classic survival horror games. And after a while, you pretty much get used to the visuals, and they are not as distracting as you get farther into the game. Crow Country follows Mara Forrest, a young investigator sent to look into the missing person case of Edward Crow. This, of course, is the owner of the now closed down amusement park where the entire game takes place at. Upon arriving there, Mara comes face to face with disturbing creatures, mysterious characters, each with their own reasoning for being at this amusement park, and of course, the terrifying and eerie setting of the Crow Country amusement park itself. Diving into the story first, surprisingly, I find it to be extremely fascinating. Honestly, when it comes to survival horror games, I'm not usually that involved with the stories, especially retro survival horror games. With that being said, the mystery of the park and Edward Crow was exciting to unravel, and I can honestly say that I was intrigued by the story from start to finish. Does it have some pretty goofy and completely insane moments with some predictable solutions? Abso-fucking-lutely. But that does not take away from the journey that the player and Mara go on as they meet some mysterious yet interesting characters throughout their time in Crow Country. Turning our attention to the gameplay, Crow Country was obviously inspired by classic survival horror games like Resident Evil. And some of those inspirations are easier to notice than others. For example, the inventory menu closely resembles old school Resident Evil games, complete with a status of the player. Just like with those Resident Evil old school titles, Mara's status will change based on the injuries that she receives, and she can even get poisoned, in which she'll need to use an antidote. Unfortunately, don't expect Mara to start mixing some herbs. That's not going to happen in this game. The combat of the game also takes inspiration from classic survival horror games, but believe it or not, it actually includes a lot of unique features of its own. For example, instead of traditional fixed camera angles seen in most classic survival horror games, Crow Country features a rotating camera that the player can move around on their own. Personally, I probably would have preferred fixed camera angles, but for the map of this game, it's clear that a rotating camera was more ideal and beneficial. Also, Crow Country features an aiming system that's a little more advanced than your traditional classic survival horror games. Instead of just aiming in the direction of the enemy like you see in old school Resident Evil and Silent Hill games, Crow Country gives a freeform aiming system that allows you to aim wherever you want during combat. This system allowed more freedom and made it possible to get critical hits by shooting the weak spots on enemies and even using the environment to your advantage. Unfortunately, it was my least favorite feature of this game though. Again, I appreciate the developers taking a chance on a more unique change to retro survival horror games, but I feel like this one felt out of place for a game like this. I would have preferred traditional aiming seen in classic survival horror games, especially since the aiming system was slow and difficult to maneuver. Sure, it allowed more freedom, but considering that it took a long time to aim at the enemy and trying to hit the weak spot was even more difficult, it got to the point where I found myself just running away from enemies than trying to kill them, especially in sections with multiple enemies in the same area. Speaking of which, avoiding enemies was very easy to do in this game. To be fair, most classic survival horror games were like that though, so it's not something that I would take off points for. Still, even in games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, you still found some situations where it was worth it to kill the enemy than to avoid them. For example, hallways that were too tight to avoid zombies or hunters would force a player to either kill them or use precious healing items if they took damage while trying to avoid them. In Crow Country's case, there weren't too many tight areas, and most of the time it was very easy to avoid enemies without firing a single shot. And even if you were to make a mistake and take damage, Crow Country ran into one more problem: the resources. I say this time and time again, but the most important part of survival horror games, for me, are the limited resources. If the game chooses to reward too many resources to the player throughout the experience, then the game doesn't really evoke the tension and feeling of anxiety that you would expect from a survival horror game. Imagine running very low on resources, and just like that, you find yourself against a boss fight. It's the most thrilling and terrifying feeling that you can only experience in a survival horror game that features limited resources. In Crow Country's case, the game offers way too many resources. I will say that I can't fairly speak on the limited resources of ammunition, as I found myself running away a lot. Therefore, I always had a ton of ammo at my disposal. However, it's the amount of healing items available to the player that really bothers me. I don't think there was a time where I didn't have the maximum amount of medium and large medkits and antidotes in my inventory. In fact, it was because of the amount of healing items available throughout the map that I was motivated more to just run away and take a couple of hits rather than killing the enemies. Now listen, I know by looking at all of the criticism that I mentioned above that you might believe that I don't like this game, when in fact it's actually the opposite. There are plenty of great things in Crow Country that I actually really do appreciate, and I'm excited to see more of them in future games by these developers. For example, another important aspect of survival horror games that seems to get overlooked a lot are the puzzles. Thankfully, that's not the case here. Crow Country features some of the most creative puzzles that I've seen in survival horror games. Sure, none of them are extremely difficult, but by no means are they that easy. Most of them play to the environment, in which the player will need to explore posters and pictures that'll provide hints to the solution. Others may involve you finding certain items and then using them in a specific way that'll create some unique solutions. I don't want to spoil any of the puzzles or their solutions, so I'll just say that they are very satisfying for those interested in survival horror games that feature creative puzzles. Another fantastic feature in Crow Country is the map itself. The setting of a closed down amusement park is already a terrifying location on its own, but it's the way SFB Games handles the environments and set designs that really help this theme park stand out. Each area feels unique and different from each other, and unlocking new doors and areas throughout the game is both satisfying and exciting, as you never know what to expect. For example, throughout the game, you'll find yourself exploring 4 major areas of the theme park, each with their own unique scenery. In one section, you'll find a haunted mansion and a secret dungeon. In another, you'll find yourself under the sea with a submarine. The environments and the change of setting in each of these areas keep things feeling fresh and new as you move deeper and deeper into this abandoned amusement park. Crow Country is a fantastic example of a game that is a love letter to classic survival horror games, but still feels like it has its own identity. Do I agree with all of the different features included in this game? No, absolutely not. But I appreciate the effort of trying to make things feel fresh and new. Crow Country is a lot of fun, especially for fans of retro survival horror games. In fact, I probably would only recommend it to gamers that appreciate the old school survival horror games. Its unique animation style, the intriguing storyline, the incredible set design of Crow Country's amusement park, and the long list of interesting and satisfying puzzles of the game are just some of the incredible features that I absolutely love about this game. So my final verdict for Crow Country is an 8 out of 10. Keep in mind that I'm comparing it to other indie survival horror games like Alyssa and Tormented Souls. While I don't think it hits as hard as a game like Tormented Souls, there are plenty of features to appreciate with this game. And for a 5-hour trip back to classic survival horror at a $20 price tag, it's a must play for fans of the genre. Especially when in comparison, I spent $40 for less time and no gameplay on Fort Solace. Yeah, I had to throw that in there again, guys. I'm still hurting about that game. Anyway, that's it for today's episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know if you have any questions about this game. Also, don't forget to leave a like on today's video and subscribe for more survival horror content. But as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.